Welcome to View from Left Field, where we analyze and discuss the weekly news. I'm your host, Will, and today we are going to be having an episode discussing the election that just took place, and we are going to be analyzing the results of the elections and many other topics surrounding it. So on our panel today, we have Jerry.
Hello.
We have Tex,
Hey there.
Nolan,
Hey everyone.
SM Safone,
How you doing?
and last but not least, Samya.
Hey, everyone.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. I think that this is going to be a very interesting and I think it's going to be a really fruitful episode to kind of sum it up into one word. Because we do have a lot to talk about, not only about the election, but also things that kind of happened with the election, the reactions, and also really what we're going to be doing moving forward. Now that we are, in January, we're going to be in a Trump presidency, kind of what that means and what that also means for our organizing and other long-term plans that we're going to have. So yeah, to anyone who may not have heard yet, Trump won the election on November 5th. I don't know how many of you stayed up late or how late you stayed up watching the numbers. I stayed up till about 11 p.m. Eastern, checking the numbers or seeing what was going on. And one thing that I will say I noticed right away is when I was looking at the electoral numbers, that Harris was constantly trailing behind, always, the entire night. I checked at one point, and I think Trump was at maybe 95 votes, and Harris maybe only had 20, 30, something like that. And it really just got worse from there. I remember when I went to bed that night, I looked, and I think Harris had about 120 and Trump had close to 200. And I was kind of looking at the map, and I saw the West Coast still had not been counted yet. So there was California, Oregon, and Washington. And I looked up the numbers, saw, well, that's about 70 votes, I think, between those three states, give or take. I know California was in the 50s. But I think even going to at that point, I looked and I go, well, I really don't know if Harris is even going to win because she's already behind so much. Even if she wins that West Coast and she hits 200, she's going to still be behind. And of course, woke up the next morning about 4:30 is when I saw it and they declared it that it was Trump. So.
Well, you got to remember one thing. Any election, the way our system is currently set up, it's going to play out that way.
Yep.
Whether the Democrat wins or loses. Because first, you have a lot of the southern states that are the earliest with their polls closed. It almost always goes Republican, so you're automatically going to see the Republican in the lead. And then even in other states, the areas where you typically get the Democratic vote, which is in the condensed cities, those always comes in last because those precincts have the most votes to count. So it always plays out that way. I think the issue this time where they were expecting those results to come in and they just didn't come in the way they expected. Yeah, Kamala Harris won a lot of big cities by high margins, but they're not the same high margins that other Democratic candidates have had in the past.
That's right. They lost approximately 11 million voters. Overall turnout was down this year versus 2020. So we saw a huge wave of apathy across the American electorate. No one was inspired by these candidates. And what we saw here was really a pretty milquetoast opposition candidate winning against an unpopular incumbent administration. Kamala Harris came into this campaign late as a result of Joe Biden refusing to drop out. She had no time to build momentum. There was no open primary process for them to select a good candidate. And Biden was pushed out because he was extremely unpopular and unelectable. And what did Kamala run her campaign on? I'm going to be exactly like Biden. She said, I'm not going to change anything. If you like the Biden campaign, you like me. She should have campaigned on pushing away from the Biden administration to gain those votes. But she didn't. And what did we see? We saw a huge decrease in turnout, and we saw a overwhelming loss for the Democrats. The first time that they have lost a popular vote in quite some time.
It's
And
almost like
let's-
gaslighting workers, telling them the economy is great when clearly none of us could afford to live day to day. Didn't work.
It was also rather embarrassing that you had, especially like Trump and JD Vance were the only one mentioning any kind of economic issues for average people. Especially the vice presidential debate was clear as that, where JD Vance was the only one talking about rising food and gas prices and the plight of average people, whereas Tim Walz was just going off on oh, how crazy the Republicans are, while both of them still agreeing on supplying weapons for Israel and all these other places. But the Democrats had zero messaging for regular people. Instead of, when people tried to bring up these to them, all we got was, I'm speaking.
Well, and the topic of Palestine too. I mean, how many people decided not to vote just in general because of the Biden administration's actions in the last year, with arming Israel and really having a hand in what's going on over there in the genocide. And so, I remember seeing leading up to that, especially the Democrats losing like huge areas of like the Muslim population, things like that, because they were so unpopular. And Harris saying that she was not going to stop arming Israel. If she became president, it was just going to be business as usual. Like you said, nothing fundamental is going to change.
Polling showed Harris picking up to 6 percentage points in key areas if she simply changed her stance on Palestine. It really is that simple. Instead, they chose to continue their, neocon, deranged obsession with being the world police and funding our allies. And that's really it.
And people like Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar overwhelmingly won re-election, even when in some of their districts they were overwhelmingly voting for Trump.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah, and the point that this comes back to, of course, with the Democrats losing, is they're always going to blame the third party voters. They're going to blame Jill Stein, of course, as they have done so often in the past. But when you look at the numbers, the third party voters, whether we're talking about the Green Party, the Libertarians, just the regular independents, they accounted for maybe less than 2% of the whole national vote. I mean, it is a fraction of how much they actually took. So when you line those numbers up and you look at how much Harris lost by and how much the third party, how many people actually voted third party, the blame is not on the third party voters. They would have lost. Even if all of those third party voters voted Democrat, they still would have lost. But, we're going to hear it. We're going to hear that it was Jill Stein's fault. It was the third party voters' fault. It was yada, yada, yada. It's everyone else's fault but the Democrats. No accountability.
I mean, right.
And
Some go as far as to blame Biden for it. Yes, I think Biden has a lot of, responsibility in the campaign. He refused to leave when they could have actually formulated a better campaign around Kamala. But it's not just him. It is that whole entire infrastructure. Remember what they did to Bernie in 2020. That is why Biden was or is president today, is because they wanted to oust him. And, they called Obama to have all the other candidates throw their endorsements towards Biden. This is not to blame any one Democrat. This is on the Democratic Party, because they do not see working people. They see it as an endangerment to their establishment.
Yeah, absolutely. Salmia, was there something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I spent election night with a friend of mine. Her family is like very pro-Democrat, and she kept showing me like these TikToks of people blaming third-party voters, specifically Jill Stein voters. And I mean, they were saying all sorts of things from, how voting third party is throwing away your vote to just straight up slandering the Green Party, saying that Butch Ware is like transphobic, or or that he's against abortion rights. And it was just astounding to me that this is what young people are seeing if they're going online, if they're I guess even a little bit progressive, and they're behind Democrats. And I've also heard people saying that the reason why Kamala lost is, oh, clearly it's because she's a woman of color. Now, that could be true, that there maybe are people with inherent biases who would just never vote for a woman of color. But at the same time, if you looked at all the third party candidates, I believe maybe it changed last time I checked, but Jill Stein was the leading third party candidate. She's a woman. She's not a woman of color, but considering how popular the Libertarian Party and RFK were, I was pretty surprised that she actually came out on top of the third party voters. So, maybe part of it is because of discrimination or some sort of inherent bias, but ultimately, that's just an excuse for the party's poor policies.
Yeah, I think it
Yeah.
was definitely a contributing factor, her race and gender, but ultimately it was just a bad campaign. And it really was. They were running the 2008 Obama campaign again. And voters don't want Obama. Voters rejected Obama's administration in 2010. They reelected him in 2012, but they sure didn't give the Democratic Party mandate over all the government. And now the Democratic Party of 2024, after seeing the success of Bernie Sanders in 2016 and 2020, has decided, no, actually, we still want Obama.
What are you
Even
talking about,
worse,
Text? It was the Brat Summer.
Even worse, they were repeating Hillary Clinton's failed strategy of for every working class person you lose, you're going to gain some suburban, middle class, petty bourgeois person, which was a failure from the start.
Right.
But what Sonia was saying, little things like Tex mentioned before, just if she had the right position on Palestine, she would have easily won Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, and that would have given her 270 electoral votes. The margins were that close, where just a slight policy position changes and she would have won. But of course, they're tone deaf. They're not going to listen to the people because we're just peasants and peons. We don't mean anything. It's all about we owe them, they don't owe us, and it just shows you why the system is an abject failure.
Yeah, and after the election, something I noticed that the unions were doing, because if people don't remember, leading up to the election, I mean, even a year ago, a lot of the unions were, of course, behind the Democrats. A lot of them were endorsing Biden. A year and a half ago, they were endorsing Biden. And then once Biden stepped down and Kamala was running, I mean, the next day, they were all saying, oh, we're endorsing Kamala. And they even doubled down on it. A lot of them said, we're reaffirming our endorsement of Harris, or they would say things like that. But then after the Democrats lose, the following day, they do like this form of damage control is what it seemed like. A lot of them were putting out statements where they said that, you know, the Democrats weren't speaking, or they weren't talking about issues that were important to American workers. And there was this like specific verbiage that I feel like a lot of them used where it was something similar to that, but they all kind of said the same thing. And it's like, okay, but all of the unions that are saying this, like, you lined up behind the Democrats this entire time. You knew how poor of a platform they were running. And
Yes.
now you're deciding to come out after the fact and say, well, they didn't talk about American workers' issues enough.
Well, quick, Will, could you bring up the AFL-CIO statement?
Oh, yeah, I'll try and find it.
While you pull that up, it's similar to what Bernie Sanders said. The Democrats have abandoned the working class, and so the working class abandoned them. And he's right. Objectively, he is correct. However, instead of saying that during the election and extracting actual concessions from Democratic Party leadership, all of these unions and Bernie Sanders have waited until it is too late. It is far too little and far too late.
Well, most of the unions, their statements were a lot more milquetoast than what Bernie said. But specifically with the AFL-CIO, and keep in mind, the AFL-CIO, the leadership of the AFL-CIO, which is the National Federative Body of Labor, is an appendage of the Democratic Party. But if Will could get that up for us, and there's just one little line, it just...
So yeah, it starts, it says, presidential administrations change, but the labor movement's values do not. We stand for the freedom to organize and the right to collectively bargain. Yada, yada, yada. Let's see.
second
Oh,
paragraph.
here it is. Yep, here it is. They say, so this results as a blow for every worker who depends on the elected leaders to fight for their jobs, our unions, our contracts. We organized for months to produce a nearly 17-point advantage for Vice President Kamala Harris with union members, but it is clear that the economic struggle working class people are facing is causing real pain, and neither party has sufficiently addressed it.
Yeah, so they are just essentially saying they didn't do enough on the economy for the workers. That's why they lost. They're not going as far as Bernie went. And Bernie was objectively correct. The Democrats threw the working class overboard. What is it, 32 years ago now, with the Democratic Leadership Council and Bill Clinton taking over the party in '92.
Mm-hmm.
That's when they threw the working class overboard. Unfortunately, it's taken 32 years for much of the working class to realize. But they were thrown overboard 30 plus years ago when they completely obliterated what was left of the New Deal coalition.
And it doesn't sound like they're going to be learning any lessons from this, like we saw in 2016.
And there's unions that, quite frankly, didn't even recognize this much. Like I could say my union, the ATU, the international president, the statement they put out was weak.
Mm-hmm.
We're just gonna keep fighting for our values, and they compared values Kamala Harris showed to the values Trump showed. Quite frankly, I didn't see any values from Kamala Harris. I saw nothing but a vapid, blank, empty shell of a politician that was just there for no reason.
Her concession speech was just like, well, we gave it our best type of thing. It was very...
She had a
I think
really
both
hard
of them
time
have-
staying on message.
I think both of them have really great values. You know, one wants to keep prisoners locked up longer than their sentence. The other wants to keep children and their families locked up in cages and deported. It's about the same thing, right?
Right.
She had a hard time staying on message during her concession speech, considering the whole campaign. She said that if Trump wins, it's going to be the end of democracy. We will be entering fascism. And then what is she doing during her concession speech? She's smiling and laughing and saying, don't worry, we're going to keep up all the normal institutions. It does not track with what she was saying during the campaign.
It's time for Resistance 2.0.
Speaking of smiling and laughing, did everybody see Biden's speech after the election?
Oh,
It was
God.
he was the most alert I've seen him in years. It almost looked like he was happy Kamala lost.
Yeah, I do think, like I said earlier, I think he is that petty. and I'm gonna stay in the race, and it really is just goes to show like the disunity too within the party. He really did have a grudge. I mean, he had her as vice president, I think, for cynical reasons, and threw her under the bus really all the way through his entire presidency. I think he had her go to the border because it was not a popular issue for Democrats to
Like,
throw.
How the Democrats ran him for cynical reasons.
Dr.
Oh,
Jill
okay.
Biden and maybe have some ice cream, and it's gonna be a good time, yeah.
You can't forget that Biden was picked as Obama's VP candidate to appeal to the conservative white voters.
Correct.
That's right.
Yeah.
And there's a reason that in his senatorial campaign, he was known as Biden, the senator from Bank of America.
Remind me again, who gave Strom Thurmond's eulogy? Who was that?
And I thought the Democrats ran a flawless campaign. I thought that there was nothing they did wrong.
That's certainly
Went
what we've been
perfect.
hearing from the Kamala is brat camp.
Right. Yeah.
It was a flawless campaign because the capitalists stayed in power.
That's
Right.
right. And they'll use this as an opportunity to move further to the right in the next campaign. We were the magical progressive voter that they don't need to win, but also if they lose, it's our fault.
I think of when Bill Clinton, after the 2020 Democratic primary, was up on stage congratulating Klobuchar, the South Carolina senator who endorsed Biden.
Klobuchar is from Minnesota.
What's his name? It's similar. But the South Carolina Democrat senator, when that endorsed that turned the tide for Biden in the primary, him smiling, praising him is what I think of. It's like they're so prideful even when they lose, and they don't. It's not their strategy to win or lose because they need people like Trump to run on. I mean, 2020, because you had COVID, Trump was very unpopular, and I would argue that it was due to COVID that Biden was able to win against a very unpopular president. And a lot of his voters, like men for Trump, white men did vote for Trump. He lost women. He lost women, and he still won. He actually got other people from different demographics who were unsatisfied with the current administration. And that's
Well, he won 64% of it, Native Americans. So that shows you where the settlers crowd and how far off they are with reality.
Yeah, and something else I wanted to bring up as far as the response to the elections that we've been seeing was, and this happens every single election, without fail. I see people on the ultra left who the next day they will usually say something along the lines of, "It's time to get armed, time to go buy a gun, time to go get your gun training, join this gun organization, do this and that." And it's like, how out of touch, first off, how, are you? And I have seen two groups now, and it seems like they have this, just, I don't know if you want to call it like a romanticized idea of being in some kind of civil war.
Oh, absolutely.
The exact
It's
same
a
that the
fetish.
far right does. Yeah,
It is.
absolutely.
It gives fodder to these fascists. Is Trump a fascist? Whatever, but there are definitely fascists around him, and I'm concerned more with the JD Vances too, and the people around him in big tech and monopoly capital. But it gives them fodder to really dismantle the entire left or anyone that has an argument against Trump or people with progressive values. It's dangerous.
Definitely.
It's left in form, right, in essence.
And during the
Right.
campaign, Trump openly said he's interested in bringing the National Guard down on left protesters. Project 2025 is talking about mass deportations and concentration camps. If you've already got concentration camps built, it's not a long jump.
They didn't go away in
Right.
2020.
Also,
Now they're going to get worse.
can I also say just about all the reactions on social media I've seen where people who were maybe either left leaning or liberals are suddenly now embracing the state, saying, oh, everyone who voted for Trump, if you've got an undocumented in your family, let's deport you. Oh, is ICE still giving rewards for undocumenteds? Oh, why, yes, they are. And it's just like, scratch a liberal, and it's just a
Yeah.
fashion. It's,
That's
There's
right.
unlimited amount of hypocrisy there.
And one thing to remember,
That I've seen like on liberals' part, I've seen reactions that are like, if you are like a minority and you voted for Trump, you know, screw you, like you deserve all the hate that's coming for you. Or if you're Muslim and you voted for Trump, I hope that terrible things happen to Palestine. I've seen reactions like that, and that is so appalling.
Yep.
It's shows how, you know, these people's interest is just it's like a football team, you know?
Yep.
Rather than caring about what the issues are, they're just like Trump needs to lose.
The thing I heard a lot is, I'm going to show these Trumpers how wrong they are. I'm going to track the price of eggs and milk every day and show them that inflation will go up. And it's like, if that is the only indicator that is going to determine
well,
Trump's.
I could go on long rants that would take over this, but you know, my brother who used to call himself a libertarian, now is basically a liberal. That was one thing he was pushing before the election, how bad inflation's gonna be, how bad inflation's gonna be, how bad inflation's gonna be on the Trump. I'm like, how bad is inflation now?
Right.
Like, I've seen, not for nothing, in the last 5 years, my electric bill has doubled.
Oh yeah, here too.
My gas bills have doubled for the car. Everything's gone up. You can't live.
Food's
So you're
expensive.
not gonna get working people to buy what you're selling if you're selling them that something that's already going on now and you're blaming it on the next guy.
That's right. The Biden
But also-
administration has been pretending that we are not in the middle of still a huge recession. They're pretending that we're not still in the middle of a huge pandemic that is ongoing. Infections are at the same level as they were in 2020. And we're just pretending like it's not there.
Yep.
Yeah, and also the immigration and the mass deportations issue. We can't forget Obama in each of his terms deported more people than Trump did in his term. Biden in his term deported more people than Trump did in his term.
Yep.
It's when Trump does it, it's bad. When the Democrats do it, it's good.
Hey, maybe
And we
we'll get
pretend it's not
AOC
there.
back down on the border crying next to the cages again, though.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And
Another
they had
photo
the
op.
border wall instead of the barrier fence.
Oh,
Yeah,
Right.
and they-
It goes
And
back
those
to the
cages were
border
there
wall.
for Obama, but where was everybody?
right.
Correct. Well,
Yeah. And,
Kamala was
and going back to, the point that I brought up about, ultra leftists talking about how we all just need to get guns and, we'll be fine. Especially for people who call themselves or pretend that they are on the left, and yet they don't want to do they want to do zero organizing. They don't even, these are people who can't even talk to their coworkers. These are people who have probably never talked to a Trump voter. Because I have, where I live, there's a lot of people who voted for Trump, and these are working people that I work with every single day. And I have talked to them about different issues. And you can say that, yes, are they voting for Trump? Is that, of course we don't like Trump. That's not what any of us are saying. But the thing is that when you talk to these people, like, it is very clear what their issues are. A lot of these people do not like the monopolies. They don't like monopoly capitalism. They don't like the bosses always telling them what to do, and they know that they're not making enough as they should. These are people, I hear this all the time from
Exactly right.
these exact types of people, and yet these are the people that apparently we shouldn't be organizing. We should we should be in a civil war against these people. We don't want to. It flies in the face of
Right.
everything that that they apparently stand for.
What I have noticed is I've met more Trump voters that will admit that. I mean, I think there are like two Trump voters. There are, yes, some of them are like straight up Nazis and are racist, and I
Of
don't
course,
really think I convinced them too much, but
Of
you could
course.
try. Good luck. But there are some that are just concerned about the economy. And those kinds of Trumpers I've noticed, they will admit things like, well, I like Bernie. He got screwed in the Democratic primary. They really probably would have voted for Bernie over Trump.
And
You
what
know
do
how
those two
many-
candidates have in common? They're both populists.
And I noticed more of those than the straight up racist ones. But
You know how many people that I work with, when I shared Bernie's statement on my Facebook page, were all 100% agreement, and they all voted for Trump.
Mm-hmm. It's like what Jill Stein said in her statement. If there's no progressive alternative, people will resort to right-wing populism. If the Democrats did not offer an opposition, they did not offer a progressive campaign, and Trump was speaking to actual issues that actual people were facing, and simply on the basis of actually talking about facts like the gas prices, whatever. He saw that the Gaza war was unpopular. So in the last couple weeks of the campaign, you see a huge shift on his policy where he pretends, oh, I'm actually anti-war. Meanwhile, he's on the phone with Benjamin Netanyahu trying to get the campaign to finish the job worked out. But he's pretending to the public. And these people, a lot of them, the working class folks who voted for Trump, are underinformed. They don't have enough information coming to them because the corporate media is delivering only what they want them to hear.
And how many people did he convince with that shift on Palestine? Whereas people abandoning Kamala Harris because of her position on Palestine. Add to it, the vast majority of working class Trump supporters, one of the key issues that they were pushing was ending the financing of the war in Ukraine.
That's right. And now Joe Biden is rushing to send as much money as he can during his lame duck as he possibly can. He's sending billions.
Yeah. And along with that point, how many, I can't count how many liberals I've seen that, they say that exact thing that we, mentioned earlier, where it's like, well, if you voted for Trump, I can't be friends with you. It's not about this. It's about, and they want to play this game where, now all of a sudden, if someone voted for Trump, it's like, oh, well, I can't talk to you about politics because you voted for Trump, kind of thing. And
right,
it's a level of immaturity
I'll
to the extreme.
I'll admit something. In 2016, I was devastated when Trump won, and I was under the whole, well, Bernie or bust kind of mentality. I kind of went through my own, I guess, stages of grief. I mean, I was just disgusted with Trump. He's a horrible, like, selfish narcissist that I find very dangerous. I think that led me to the right direction, though, that anger at first. And I kind of found out down the line that it is Trump, but he is a product of a system that really will not actually fix the problems of working people. I mean, this is happening not just in the US, this is happening worldwide because of inflation isn't up just in the US. Like we saw this happen in the UK, we saw this happen in France. You know where we didn't see this though is our neighbors in Mexico who re-elected their left-wing coalition like with AMLO and now a woman president, or the first woman Jewish president of Mexico. Because they actually delivered to the working people.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jerry, 2016, I was actually in Japan living in a share house with other expats doing work. I kind of actually figured Trump may actually win in 2016 because we were there during when Brexit was coming out. And the one time we had noise complaints called on us was when myself, two guys from the UK and a New Zealander were watching Brexit. And we were saying like, holy crap, if this happens, Trump could actually win. And then seeing it happen, I'm like, oh, geez.
And then the Japanese police come over and go,
And they're like, well,
"What
what
are
are
you
you
doing?"
doing, Rob? We're like, UK just exited the EU. And they're like, okay, just keep it down. Thank you.
I think for me, one of the best things that I read personally was from Georgy Dimitrov.
You
We
kind
lost
of
you.
there, Will.
Am I cutting out? Am
You're
I
back
better now? Okay.
I know.
Sorry. Internet said it was unstable.
It's the powers that be trying to keep this message from going out.
Exactly. It was when I read Georgy Dimitrov. I think it was I don't remember which of the two books, I forget, but there is a paragraph where he talks about, literally joining fascist organizations and trying to pull workers away from fascism, basically. And he says in there, he says when the workers come into contact with fascism and they realize that their interests are not, they're not, fascism is not going to serve the working class interests. That is when you can pull them away from those organizations and things like that. So, my point of, kind of bringing up how liberals want to just cut ties with every single person that voted for Trump. It's like, well, no, we should be talking to these people. We should be working with them. So that way, when the time comes, when their interests hit a wall and they realize like, oh, that the working class interests are coming into conflict with monopoly capitalist interests, that is when we can finally pull them away from those forces, and we can pull them into mass orgs and working class organizations.
I think that
And this
that's
is
the
what Lenin
fundamental.
said.
Go ahead, Nolan.
Sorry, I was going to say this is what Lenin said as well, that you got to work
Right.
in the conservative trade unions instead
Yeah.
of make your own organization that is a pure thing, but it's nowhere where any of the people are. Sorry,
I think
Tex.
that's the fundamental difference between our ideology and liberalism, is that they believe that there's just a section of the population that is inherently evil. Whereas materialism says no matter what their views are, no matter how abhorrent they are, they came from their material conditions that surround them, where they are at right now. And we can reach those people and we can teach them and educate them about the realities of the materialist world around them and help bring them to a real, rational, working class ideology that can actually move our country forward.
Yep.
And I
And
have a
that-
question about that because I really think that is the right messaging. And the thing I'm concerned about, especially with the women around me in my life that I see that I work with, I'm not a woman, and so I can't actually articulate exactly what I want to say. But it's we want to get we need women. They hold up half the world to get on our side, and I think we can actually convince a lot of liberal women to even see that light. I know there are some there, and they are hurt, gutted. I think I heard, and I can't imagine how that feels. And we want to support women. We see that in Missouri, a very red state that actually voted to preserve abortion rights in their constitution, yet they voted for Trump and Josh Hawley in the election. I want to just ask that to people. How do we get, like, let's say, women that are concerned about Trump to see that while they are angry at I would say the misogynists, the creepy men that are, that are rapists that have been tried for that and are felons.
Well,
You
you got to
can't-
remember that you just mentioned rapists. A good portion of these Democratic men are no better.
Absolutely. Right.
At the same time, you got to remember, one thing I've said in the last 8 years, I don't like Trump. I don't agree with Trump. But I can understand why people have voted for Trump.
Definitely.
And we need to get past, because the major problem here is that just the utter propaganda that we get that's thrown at us by the capitalist controlled media. Even at this point, a lot of these so-called independent media types, they get money from these people, and they've turned and are doing the same thing.
Johnny Harris.
And it's just we got to push through that. I'm sorry to say bullshit, because it's inundated the mind of your regular person, and people just can't. People don't have enough time because they're working 60, 70, 80, 90 hours a week to just get through the fog of propaganda that's thrown in their face. And that's where we got to come in. We just got to keep pushing what we're saying, and we got to connect it to real substantive issues that have happened throughout history. And when people see, at some point, people will start to connect it.
Yeah, I really have to agree with that. You know, I've seen a lot of frustration coming from people around me. And I mean, their reactions are varied. You know, some people are like, I'm going to leave the country, or like, you know, or they're just outraged. But, you know, and I felt a little sense of frustration towards them because, you know, some of the people who I know who were most upset, rightfully so, also don't really do much politically, aside from voting once every 4 years. My thing was, I suppose the best thing we can do is really use that frustration and sort of push them towards action. One thing that struck me is a friend of mine who I was speaking to told me, you know, this was the worst possible outcome of the election, but you know what? Next time around, instead of complaining and not doing anything, I'm gonna have to actually do something and get involved in some way. And I was like, you know what? That's the right attitude to have. What can we do now? There's way too much fear mongering of like what's gonna happen now, rather than saying that now is the time to take action and get involved in whatever way you can.
That's right. And we're going to
Yeah.
need a movement that speaks to the needs of working class people and isn't controlled by those corporate interests to do that.
Yeah, and you know, on that, you know, something that has been done traditionally, especially in the states in America, was, you know, the idea, and this was kind of pushed by Gus Hall and Henry Winston, a lot in a lot of their writings too, was the concept of the anti-monopoly coalition. And you know, it's something that I've been trying to kind of read up on again lately. And they mention it in all kinds of different books, but you know, Gus Hall, like for instance, he talks about it in Working Class USA, The Power in the Movement. And then of course Henry Winston talks about it in Strategy for a Black Agenda. He has a section, remind me, it says it's from the anti-slavery to anti-monopoly, I believe is what it was called. If someone,
I don't remember, but that's a great book. So good that I would want to
fantastic.
rename that to A Strategy for an American Agenda. But it is an amazing book. Everyone should
It
find
is.
that.
It is great. But you know, it's that idea again, you know, of the anti-monopoly coalition. It's, you know, it's just trying to, you know, you're trying to work with the mass, the, you know, working people, and you're trying to pull them into the mass organization, trying to pull them together so we can work with them. Because, you know, as Gus Hall points out, he says Americans are already against monopoly capitalism. They, you know, that is something that they already don't like. And so it is taking that frustration at monopoly, and it's pointing them towards the symptom of the capitalist system. You know, he says that they don't know that their, you know, their woes and their frustrations are because of that. So it's taking those people where they're at, where it's saying, okay, well, we already know these people are against the, you know, they're already against monopoly capital. Well, that's a good place to start. So where can we take them from here? And, you know, it's building that
Yes.
broad democratic movement that Hall talks about.
And for Henry Winston, the Strategy for a Black Agenda, you know, it is black and white unite,
Mhm.
and unite against what? against monopoly capital, obviously. That is what is pitting white people against black people so that they can
Yep.
exploit both groups. And if Trump did anything, it was that he was able to pit people against each other to vote for him against their interests, in my opinion. And that is why we have to have the messaging that goes against that. And that is not what we got with Democrats under Kamala Harris's campaign. You know, she talked about the middle class. Well, guess who the middle class voted for? Not you. I think it was in the income brackets. I look it up. I think it was 50K, 40K to 100K. They voted for Trump. Poor people did vote for Kamala. So, you know, that's, or the people in the
Well,
lower brackets.
The first mistake here is looking at middle class as a wage bracket.
Right.
Middle class is, you know, it doesn't matter how much money you make. If you work for a
Sure.
wage, you're working class. You're not middle class.
Well,
Okay?
right.
That's what you need to get away from that thinking, because the whole term middle class, the way it's been used in this country, has been used in a way to convince certain working class people they have nothing in common with other working class people, and to make them think they have more in common with their boss. You got nothing in common with your boss. Sure, outside of work, you may have similar interests, but when it comes to your relationship with your boss, you have nothing in common. Their whole goal is to get as much work and productivity out of you, paying you as little as possible. That's not in your interest. That's completely diametrically opposed to your interest as a worker.
Correct.
Yep.
So
Correct. I'm just
you
saying
gotta
that
get away from that.
Oh no, I
mindset.
agree. But I'm just saying that that's not a winning strategy, as we just saw in numbers. That
Oh no, it was never going to be a winning strategy.
That's right. She ran on the platform of I'm a small business owner. I'm going to help small business owners. And small business owners don't want Republican diet. They want classic, all original flavored Republican.
well, right. And so, how did campaigning with Dick Cheney's daughter work for you?
That
Like,
Dick Cheney endorsement worked out in numbers for her.
it probably hurt her. I don't think there's any way we can know for sure, but it
Well,
probably did.
It worked out in numbers for Trump.
Yeah, something, you know, and Jerry, you mentioned you know, the Henry Winston book. You know, from that section, it's from anti-slavery to the anti-monopoly strategy. And there is one section in this book, or in this section in particular, that I read all the time, and it's just a section that's called Two-Sided Pressure on King. So he talks about Martin Luther King. And
Read the good word.
I'm
Go
gonna,
ahead.
yeah, I was just gonna quote this here. I'll share it as well. So he says, at the same time, the frustrations of radical youth were intensified by the escalation of the Vietnam War in 1965, immediately after the new Civil Rights Act was passed. Many black and white radicals, including Carmichael, Cleaver, Newton, Foreman, and Hayden, began to step up their attacks on the civil rights struggle. They placed themselves in opposition to King, who was determined not to abandon, but to strengthen the forces of the civil rights decade, to deepen and broaden them into a realignment that could carry the struggle against poverty and racist oppression to a new level. If King was not without error in coping with pressure from the right, the later with that of the pseudo-radicals, his overall record was one of firm adherence to militant, non-violent mass struggle. The maturing of his leadership, his recognition of the decisive role of the working class, his evolvement toward an anti-imperialist position, all of his steady and remarkable growth reflected his rejection of both the opportunist pressures to limit mass struggle and the super-revolutionary pressures to substitute the rhetoric of violence for the power of mass struggle. And, you know, that's something that I see Hall mention a lot too, is, you know, this idea that ultra leftists push a lot still to this day. I mean, even Lenin condemned it.
Yeah.
Gus
And-
Hall did, you know, this idea of individual terror, like as if, you know, if the left goes out and we commit assassinations or we do these acts of violence, like somehow that will ignite something in people to,
Yeah.
you know, towards like a revolutionary struggle. And
That's what
we've
he
been-
meant by super revolutionary, was
right.
the
Yeah.
ultra leftists that
Yeah,
have
but-
this super revolutionary rhetoric. Go
If you
ahead.
go out and assassinate somebody, somebody's just going to take their place.
Mhm.
Right.
Right.
I mean, and that's
exactly.
what bothered me about the Trump assassinations. It's like
Yep.
this is I don't like the
I
man,
mean,
but it
I
does
mean,
not help.
what bothered me about the Trump assassination is that they were so blatantly fake.
It was a pretty clear mirror of the Reagan assassination attempt. And what happened
Yep.
after the assassination attempt on Reagan? Well, he won in a landslide. What happened after the assassination attempt on Donald Trump? Oh, that's right, he won in a landslide.
Right.
Right.
I agree.
Well,
It's definitely staged. And it sounds almost like a conspiracy theory, but when you consider like what nefarious, crazy things the FBI and CIA have done, it's really not that crazy.
right.
Well, look what they did to Martin Luther King. Yeah, there is some iffy stuff. Like, I don't like to tell conspiracy theories, but look into that.
You said it right. What they did to Martin Luther King.
And then
Yeah.
with the Trump one, you had the eyewitness report saying, well, we saw this guy with a gun climbing up this bed here. We tried to point him out and no one was doing anything. And then suddenly we heard pops and then
Well,
Wow.
yeah, when it comes to conspiracy theories, because I heard that too after the election results. It's like, well, I don't know about these results. They seem a little iffy. I don't know. They're coming in slow. And this is coming from liberals. And sure, there is some voter suppression, but no, Trump won.
Yeah,
He
those
did.
liberals are huffing premium grade copium.
And what here is it isn't that hard? It's like Occam's razor. What is more likely, that you go through this convoluted way of controlling the election results, or that it's just people that are rich that are just using this to control you? Like, they have the power. This is how it works. Like,
But-
for them, they will pit you against other people so that you work for them, and that's your concern is more on people that don't have power than the people that do have power.
But enough about them. What are we going to do?
Right.
Right. And
How
that's
are we going to
where,
rectify this?
yeah, and that's where bringing back the building of the anti-monopoly coalition comes into play. And exactly,
Right.
it's like, what are we doing to move that forward, that idea? I mean, I know SM, this. I mean, there are unions in the country. There are other groups that are talking about, building, whatever you want to call it, a labor party, an anti-monopoly coalition. There
Well,
are other groups talking about this.
They're
So.
not mutual. They're not exclusive at all.
Right.
An anti-monopoly coalition, if it's not being built to form some type of third party that is with labor at the forefront and bringing together all the progressive forces in the country. I mean, that's the whole point of what we got to do.
Mhm.
And you see, of course, the union, Electrical Radio Machine Workers Union, or UE, has long held this position, and they've been strong in their rhetoric, pushing forward in the last few months.
Yep.
Of course, I'm the assistant national secretary for Labor United Educational League, and we're holding a firm stance on this, and we keep pushing it. And if you look at our publication Labor Today, you'll find a lot on this subject. And we even started during the campaigning, when you saw everybody when you saw people complaining that Sean O'Brien from the Teamsters spoke at the Republican National Convention, mostly what you saw was, "Ooh, Trump's icky. You can't speak there. You're giving them a platform. Actually, they're giving you a platform."
Right.
That's two different things. Okay. And what are we supposed to not try to reach the conservative workers that are watching Trump because they like Trump, because
Mhm.
they see the shithole, I'm sorry for the language, that this country is that we're turning into, because working class is getting thrown under the bus left and right, and nobody can afford to live anymore.
We have an opportunity here. Yes, Trump, this 4 years is not going to be fun, but I don't think any Trumper voted for him because of JD Vance, unless you were Elon Musk or someone. And that is something that we can actually tie our rhetoric to, because that is where Trump is getting his money. You're going to see massive reform or lack of reforms, dismantling a lot of regulation laws around tech, and just regulation laws that are going to hurt working people and going to cause huge catastrophes. And the bottom line is, we can actually show that a progressive party that is pro-labor, anti-monopoly capital, and anti-genocide, that'd be nice.
Yeah.
We'll actually have something that will go against this. We have to plan that now. We have 4 years. We're going to see this. We know what to do. And that's the thing. Like, it seems like a few shades darker, like people are gutted, but it also has been sobering. Like, this time around, it was like it happened for me, and I kind of saw it coming. And so it didn't hurt me so hard because I knew I knew what we had to do. And I hope that others, like, we have to make a party that is progressive, that is anti-monopoly, is what I say.
I'm glad you brought up JD Vance because it makes me think of the state he comes from, Ohio. You're looking at the election results. Not only did Trump win Ohio, you know, Sherrod Brown, a Democratic senator who is known for being a friend of labor, quote unquote, you know, under the whole Goppersism mentality, he got his ass kicked just as much as Kamala.
That was money. I think that was a lot of money in that campaign too.
Money runs this country, but at the same time, you know, when your money ain't gonna win you an election if you got somebody that's has consistently gotten results for the working class. Youngstown, Ohio. Yeah, it went for Trump last time around, but other than that, it's been a strong Democratic stronghold. And Sherrod Brown has won that in every election. He got killed in Youngstown, Ohio. That's like working class, steel town. And you see places like that are where we gotta focus. Because that's where you're gonna reach the workers. And these are the workers that are getting constantly killed. And they need to be brought back into the fold. And that's why we need to work with unions like the UE. We need to reach out to unions like the Teamsters or the firefighters or UFCW Local 3000 who wouldn't back a candidate this year. That's where it's got to start. And it's got to be a rank and file led movement. And we got to start in our workplace from the bottom up.
Yeah, that's right. Start in your workplace, start in your local community. If you have a volunteer effort, that's where you're going to find people who care. Go to your food banks, go to the shelter, things like that, where people are working to build a strong community. Those people care. Those are the kind of people that we can educate and bring into our fold.
Yeah, real quick, I'll make this real quick, just like on a local level as well. You know, that was one thing that progressively was one is a lot of states passed abortion rights again. And I'm just going to bring up the wonderful state of Missouri, but also the state of Kansas also prevented abortion from being illegal a few years ago. And I'm going to bring up a great city, Kansas City, because there actually is an infrastructure there that is building on that issue that is progressive. And that is something that is positive in that sense that we can build around. And it's working women that are supporting this. And that is something that, you know, like what we saw after Bernie was a bit of a coalition of working class politics. Unfortunately, the Democrats just shut that down. We can't let them do that. We have to go outside of the Democrats. They're not our friends. They don't want us. We don't need them.
Yeah, good point. Well, that is going to conclude our episode today on the post-election analysis. I just want to say I appreciate everyone for coming today and giving their points. I think we had a very great discussion. And like others have mentioned, we have our work cut out for us for the next 4 years. And we know what we have to do. So let's get to it.
Indeed.
And before we go, and this is where our start of this anti-monopoly coalition is coming from, our next episode will feature an interview with Adam from Railroad Workers United. He is the national campaign organizer for the Public Rail Now campaign. And this will be a major step forward in building that anti-monopoly coalition.
Absolutely.
Really
Thank
looking
you
forward
again,
to
everyone. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Take care, all.